Hi, my name is Adrian Esquivel, and I'm a father of an 8-year-old and a 6-year-old in Evanston, Illinois. And I'm thrilled to introduce today's panel, which is part of the Father's Friday Summer Series. As a dad myself, I'm really grateful for Fathering Together for putting together this campaign. And as a Latino dad, I'm really excited about today's topic, LatiniDAD. I'm excited to hear everyone's thoughts on parenting from some different cultures and perspectives. And there's plenty of info to learn regardless of your background. So I hope you enjoy it. Have a good one.
Hola a todos. Hello, everyone. My name is Sergio Rosario, and welcome to LatiniDAD, a conversation about race, culture, and fatherhood. This is our third year, and with us, we have some new faces, but we have some veterans in the panel today. I am super happy. This is brought to you by Fathering Together. Fathering Together is a nonprofit organization that focuses on everything about fatherhood. So check them out, fatheringtogether.org. It's an honor to be here and to continue this conversation that I think started to develop in 2020. Yes, July 20th. 2020 was when we started talking, a bunch of Latino dads talking about, the beautiful things, the beautiful fatherhood, journey of fatherhood, but also the struggles, also the things that we didn't see when we were growing up. And today we're gonna just start talking about the different aspects of fatherhood. But first of all, I want to introduce Joe Saucedo. Joe, how are you?
Doing well, Sergio. It's great to see you.
Joe, it's good to have you here. You've been doing a lot of work in the community. You'll be doing a lot of work with Fathering Together as well as in your profession. Talk to us a little bit, very quick, about how you're involved in the fatherhood community.
For sure. Thank you, Sergio. So I have a personal connection to the co-founders, having worked with Brian Anderson. We overlap working in education, higher education, for a few years here in the Chicago area. And when he and another colleague, Chris Lewis, who's based out of Michigan, had the idea years ago to start a Dads with Daughters community on Facebook, it then evolved over time to be more inclusive of fathers of all children in general. And so when he brought me on to do some volunteer work, it was really coming at it from the lens of diversity, equity, and inclusion, because that was part of my day job for the most part. And so, and at the time I was, I think, parenting a 2-year-old, so new into my fatherhood journey. I am now father of 3 boys, ages 8, 5, and 2. And so there's a lot to be that I'm grateful for, but I'm also very exhausted. And I hope we can, talk about navigating those things. But really quick, the latest efforts that I've been a part of with Fathering Together as of this past year has been to launch school-based chapters of Fathering Together. So there's a huge community that exists online, that exists globally, even outside of the US. But here within the States, we've been trying to start small in terms of local in-person school-based groups. And so I'm part of my son's PTA at his school. And so that's kind of how I've been able to integrate inviting dads and male caregivers in the community at the school to come be a part of those efforts, to program, to share resources, to just come together and connect. So, we're starting small right now, but I'm really happy with, the inroads that we're making, at least in my local community. So hope to see more in the next year.
That's amazing. One dad at a time. That's amazing. Well, we have with us, he's returning for second time, Mr. Jorge Narvaez. Jorge, how are you? Jorge, it's good to see you. You've been doing a lot of things. You went from having the community online to offline to, doing so many beautiful projects. Talk to us about what you've been doing, because, you were on camera every week, and now you're taking that and you're working really, really hard with that. Talk to us about that.
Man, it's been first of all, it's good to see you all. I know I'm glad we finally figured it out, to get together, and I know what it is. And it's crazy because that's how it is sometimes being a dad. We got to freaking adjust on the spot, pivot right away. It's like an obligation, to get to figure it out. And so I'm glad that we're all connected again. I think just going in and out like a roller coaster over what I was, doing online consistently, and then kind of seeing, my perception of reality changing and the perception of the things that I do changing and shifting and life changing, right? And then coming back and then going into the workforce, going with the school systems, man, being a restorative justice specialist for the schools, doing mentoring for students, coaching for teachers, facilitating and also doing curriculum for like principals, and like really being in those spaces where I see what some students go through, and teachers that are parents, teachers that are dads, that are moms, military teachers, all this experience, dude. It was insane. Like finally getting a chance to do some of the nitty gritty work that I've always talked about, that I've always wanted to do, right? Not just working with fathers, but working with students, and and de veras, going onto the ground and like really listening and really like understanding what these students and these teachers are going through at any given time, and how fast things fluctuate in the school system. And so being exposed to those systems made me think about like, and really deeply reflecting, right? Because I'm also doing that, and I'm focusing on being a dad with the kids, man, and like just trying to feel alive, exercising more, trying to get my inner thoughts together, all that inner work that I got to do as a dad, that I got to do as a human being, man, and really just trying to be real with myself, trying to keep it real with the people that are following, but also with my kids. So a lot of growth, a lot of change. Very grateful, but also trying to figure out, okay, cómo le hago para seguir adelante.
Yeah. I think, Jorge, I think, you started the conversation, and we're going to talk about that in a moment. But I want to introduce here Mr. Chris Romero, because he's a first timer here. And we talk a bit. He does podcasting. He's a father. He's doing a little bit of everything. Chris, talk to us about, how you like running all the bases. You're like that utility player. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, for sure. So, day-to-day job, I am mostly in the nonprofit space, working with adult education, right? So when we think about education, we think kids and school, but I work with a nonprofit called IC Stars, where we focus on adult education and providing opportunities for those in our communities who didn't have a chance to go to college, who didn't have a chance to go to university. So with that comes a lot of baggage, right? And we bring that to the dad community. There's a lot of dads that are, like, I've been working, 3 jobs, 6 days a week, 12 hours a day, 16 hours a day, and it's just not sustainable, right? I need to invest in myself so I can create a career. And that's what we do at IC Stars. We focus mostly around IT and building a career in IT. So that's what I do on a day-to-day basis. And then also been wanting to explore the podcasting community when it was up and coming back in 2015, 2014. So I started digging into that. And keeping hobbies, I think it's also healthy as a dad, right? I had my oldest daughter, my first daughter, in 2015. At that same time, as I was becoming a first-time dad, I was also becoming an entrepreneur and launching my own business. So definitely scary times, right? Because you don't want to fail as a dad. You don't want to fail as the head of household. But you also want to take a leap of faith and become an entrepreneur. So it was definitely a time for me where things were a little ambiguous and scary. And I would have loved to have a community like this back then, right? But I'm glad to be here. I'm glad that I got invited here, because we've had a few conversations in the past that definitely I was able to walk away with some tips and just knowing that there's other people like me struggling with the same kind of decision making, as fathers. So again, just glad to be here, and I'm really interested in the topics that we'll definitely be touching on today.
Awesome. I love it. I love it. Our first topic, we already started. Let's talk about being vulnerable, right? This huge stigma. Like I still look back at my childhood. I still look back at my family members, and there's things that we don't talk about, Bruno. There's things that we don't talk about, like they happen and they're awkward, and nobody wants to open up. There's things that things that are like rumores, like or verdades oscuras, you know, like these things that happen in our family or happen in our lives that nobody wants to talk about them. And I feel like here we develop over the years, and I honestly feel since the beginning we had an open space to talk about emotions, to talk about getting connected with other dads. Now I want to throw out this question. How do we normalize that? And whoever wants to go first can go first. How, in your experience, we can normalize? Do we lead by example? Do we reach out, like, you know, on the quiet? Is it different? Is it different in every father, in different parenting styles? Let's talk about that for a moment.
If you know, I can jump in real quick, right? As a reference point, a lot of us that were fortunate enough to grow up with a dad, right? We use that as kind of like a guidance, right, or as an example. And when I think about my dad, he was not very affectionate. You know, he did his duties as a dad, but was not one to share feelings, right? Because that's how he grew up as well. But now, amongst my circle of friends, we've been intentional about just sending random text messages because we also acknowledge it's hard to speak to one another and open up. But if I send you a text message and I'm like, hey, bro, I wish you have a great day today. Or I know you dealt with this last week. You know, I hope this week goes better for you. Like we've intentionally said, like, I know sometimes it's hard for us to open up and you know, have those conversations in person, but let's start somewhere. And if that's a text message or a message over social media, I think that's a start because you're not confronting, you know, that person face to face, even though it's something positive, right? Or even something negative. Sometimes you just can't open up about something, but just sending that message and starting somewhere, I think it's a start.
Well, that's a great start. Joe, we talked about this in the past. Working with, you know, the fatherhood community, doing the school chapters, doing your regular work. How do you you know, approach this in the way that I think we as Latino men, we might have some issues, right, that are not issues that we've developed, I would say, being aware, like being consciente, conscious about it. Sometimes it's passed on to us for generations. And I think last time that you and I were on a podcast, you mentioned something very nice, and you touch on this topic. How has your approach been from the? Has it been the same from the beginning? Are you in a different stage right now? Talk to us about it.
Sure. And I do want to say, Chris, I appreciate the practical tips because I think I've been trying to practice more of that, like simply sending a text to my friends, because a lot of us don't even live in the same part of the country. And just to let somebody know that you're thinking about them really goes a long way, right? So I do want to acknowledge that tip. I think to your question, Sergio, and I don't know if this is what I referenced then, but what I've learned, especially with PTA as an example, the Parent Teacher Association, I think universally what statistics show is that it's heavily attended, or the engagement is largely skewed towards moms and females. And in working with Fathering Together, we've got a colleague who's done some research and data digging around where the dads are. And, you know, I think we don't want to confuse the fact that dads aren't at these meetings or are not part of the programming. It doesn't mean that they don't want to be a part of their kids' lives, right? So what I've come to realize in starting our school-based chapter was that there's so much power in just the invitation to say, hey, you know, no strings attached, come to our meeting. We'd love to see you there. If that's during the drop off in the morning or at school pickup, you know, talking to other parents and families. I found it useful to make that one-to-one connection. Me personally, I do better on a one-on-one basis than I do in large groups. And that's just kind of my comfort zone. And I've noticed, and you know, just to give some context, the dads that I've been working with in my school community, most of the ones that engaged in our school-based chapter are white males, white dads. And so, but we have a lot of common interests, obviously, because we're there. We want to be present for our kids. You know, a lot of us have different skill sets that we want to contribute, you know, as best as we can. But what I've come to find out again is the invitation that goes a long way to really reach out to somebody and say, hey, we're doing this, you know, we've got some upcoming events. Do you have time to volunteer maybe for an hour? You know, however you want to support. And I think so. We planned an event. I'll tell you, we launched the school-based chapter, Fathering Together, my school. It goes from kinder to 8th grade, and there's 500 students enrolled. We did a survey at the very beginning of the fall semester just to gauge interest amongst dads and male caregivers, and we only had 12 people respond to the survey, which is very, very low, but hey, I'll take what I can get. And the dads who responded had some really good ideas of what they want to do. And then from there, I said, okay, thank you for filling out the survey. Now let's plan a meeting, a kickoff meeting, and give me here's some availability. And it took a while, like a month to get, you know, things on the calendar. Similar to this interview, and I apologize for having to reschedule. But once we got to the meeting, we had 8 dads that showed up at our school atrium. We had a 1-hour session just to get to know each other. I explained Fathering Together to them and my experience with the group. And I got to tell you, it soon evolved into this like support group because folks were opening it up. I had some prompts just to guide some conversation to get to know people. And the question that really brought people in was, it took one dad to say that he was parenting a kindergartner who was on the spectrum or had some special needs. And then another dad, it prompted another dad to say, me too. And then another dad who was like listening. And then he waited, I think, till we were closer to the end of the meeting where he said, you know, I'm parenting. I only got one more year at the school, but, you know, I've been seeking out some resources and it does get better for you guys that are really worried. You know, you've got the younger kids. It does get better. And it was like, it got emotional quickly. And then we had to wrap up. But it just, in that moment, though, I just realized the power again that it's not that dads don't want to come together and don't care to be vulnerable. I think we just don't know how. Like some of us just haven't been taught how to go there. And then it's also important. I do want to say we had a disclaimer to say, hey, this is not a replacement for formal counseling. You know, go to a professional. We want to push folks to seek out, you know, professional resources if they're able. But it just was powerful to have men connect in a way that I had not seen in my school community. So anyway, just wanted to offer that.
Well, we had Chris give us some tips, and Joe talk to us about some community work that he's doing, different levels of connecting. Now, I'm going to ask Jorge about this, Jorge, because I know you recently have, you know, you have a new career. You were at a convention talking, connecting to a bunch of dads in Arizona last year, home dad. I feel like you Jorge, you handle like, you know, connecting dads at a larger scale. Can you talk to us a little bit about that, and how did you get there? Was it like that in the beginning, being a communicator, or it's continuous work from within to be able to connect, you know, in a larger scale groups, conventions, etc.?
Well, again, Sergio, it's good to hear from you, and Chris and Joe. Appreciate you guys sharing your story, how you guys unfold fatherhood, how you view your own perspectives, right, and how you see it. You know, I think that every fatherhood experience, every father has such a unique experience and approach to the way that we love ourselves and love our work and love our kids. And I got exposed to a lot of different types of fathers through this work, through this type of work that I was doing. So I'm gonna give you an idea. Like, so social media, boom, 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 everything's going well. Then I was like, I started slowing down. I was like, started focusing too much on editing videos of my family instead of spending time with my family. It got really like uncomfortable, and things started changing. The kids, everything started. So I was like, I gotta change too. I gotta grow too. I gotta figure out how to do things differently. How to pivot, right? Being a father is about pivoting. So I pivoted towards back towards Dad's Core, working with fathers that are coming out of prison, working with fathers that are in the community, military fathers, and just different types of fatherhoods. And I got exposed to so many different and perceptions of reality of what some people feel is fatherhood, different cultures, different religions, different ways of thinking, that it got me thinking about what brings us together. You know, what is it that we all have in common? What are those characteristics that make us who we are, that define me as a father, right? And each and every one of us in these little squares, right, on this video chat, well, we can go back and forth and Brady Bunch our different ways and our different styles. And that's what I started seeing. I started seeing that the that fathers have a different approach in many different ways, right? Some are more rigid, some are more fluid, some are more different spaces. It just depends on your personality and your and where you come from. So um, I think that space helped me grow, and then use this space, revisited, and I'm still connected to the fatherhood community there. Um, I just attended one of their barbecues, man, for San Diego Dad's Corps. Huge shout out to San Diego Dad's Corps for the work they're doing in San Diego for fathers. There's not a lot of fatherhood programs. That's another thing too, man. There's a lack of awareness of the importance of fatherhood. Even the definition of it is changing, you know. So going back to the route that I chose to work for the schools is really coming to realize the most simplest thing is this: is that the teachers, custodians, maintenance operations, principals, counselors, just human beings, adult human beings in schools, they govern themselves based on I feel this is a theory, fundamentally based on how they were mothered and fathered. And the way that they were mothered and fathered is the way that they lead and they do their work ethic, and the way that they care for these kids, and vice versa. So what I did realize is that um, these adult figures in the schools that influence our children and influence our lives, uh, in theory, we're all fundamentally involved with the way that we're fathered, the way that we're all fathered together in different ways. And somehow we all come to schools, and somehow we all come to work, and somehow practice on each other these versions of fatherhood and versions of parenting and versions of motherhood together. So for me, it was like, what's the common denominator? And that is is how are we going to normalize fathers allowing themselves to be not just vulnerable, but to be active listeners, to be reflective listeners, for us to be heard and to be wanted in these spaces, and to be validated and acknowledged by not just ourselves, but also the people around us, and how valuable this leadership, this is what I call this fatherhood leadership position, is in the community, right? Fundamentally in spaces. And to me, this job added a dimension of the caliber of how valuable we are as parents, as fathers. Most importantly, man, I'm not saying anything bad about women or men or fathering or mothering, because the spectrum of caregiving and relatability is so vast now, right? So I'm going to honor the word father, right? And I'm going to honor the word mother, and I'm going to honor the spaces that all come together to create inclusivity. But the point of it is that I feel like all of us have to agree on finding ways to be more vulnerable with each other, right? And that comes with listening, that comes with the right funding, and that comes with valuing being a father. So yeah,
investing in fatherhood, I think that's a great topic for another LatiniDAD panel, because there's so many ways to do that. There's so many ways, like fathering together it's doing right now with this panel, right? Instead of having a panel once or twice a year, conversations a couple of times, we need to be more active, and that's something that our three panelists here are doing every day of their lives. So we talked a little bit about connectedness, and we talked a little bit about getting and becoming open with your fellow dads and family members. But now we're going to talk about the model of fatherhood. And as Latino man, this is very important. Latino man, the general thought is like, hey, like, we had this dad who worked, came, sat on the couch, took, maybe like, this was my example. I'm saying it out of my own experience, right? Mi abuelo, he would come home and then sit on the recliner, lay back, and then my abuela would take off his boots, or he would ask us to take off his boots. He'll get the plate like right there in the recliner, and everybody needs to stop watching TV because the man of the house was there, and he wanted to watch whatever he wanted to watch, and everybody needed to be quiet because he needed to listen to the TV. And he's a great man, great work ethic. He's still alive. Mi abuelo's still alive. He's 82 years old. Still works in el campo and picks up cafe. He's a retired mechanic. And I feel like now that I'm an adult, I can talk to him and I can, share my feelings, and I get a lot more back than what I used to get as a child. Not knowing, I don't think he knew how important it was for me to get more out of him as a kid, because he was shaping me. And I think sometimes we're not aware that our character, our behavior, our train of thought, our actions are shaping others. So I wanted to unpack the models of parenting and fatherhood, and talked about your own experiences, or if you don't want to talk about your own experience, you can set an example as well of anybody that like XYZ person, or anybody that you've encountered along the way of your fatherhood journey. Joe, talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, your abuelo sounds a lot like my abuelo, one of my abuelos that I grew up with. I was fortunate, blessed to have my grandparents, my dad's mom and dad lived down the street. So that was like our second house. And I saw what you're describing. That was kind of the sort of more traditional, I'll say, model that I was exposed to. But what's ironic now, and as a parent, I'm always reflecting back to of sort of making meaning of what I went through and how it's showing up even with me and how I parent, whether I don't want to or not, it shows up. It's ironic to me, though, that in my household, my mom and dad, the gender norms were flipped. Like my mom was a breadwinner. She didn't go to college. My dad didn't go to college either, but they worked right out of high school. But my mom had an office job for 43 years at the same company. And my dad worked at a supermarket. And so, there was definitely some tension between them. There was also domestic violence was part of the story, too. But I think my dad, I think the way he role modeled, there were times where he was trying to be affectionate, but honestly, because of how I saw my grandparents, his parents, the affection just wasn't there. So I can understand now that that's what he knew and that's what he passed down to his kids. But the presence of making time, without a doubt, I appreciated his model of just putting kids first. In terms of just making the time, taking time off from work if he could, to be there to take my brother. I grew up with a twin, so we were always involved in the same activities and sports and after school stuff. And my dad did what he could to be present, to teach us, to learn how to do things around the house, for example. And but I think the typical I'm the man of the house, that I don't know that I ever really got that impression. And part of that, I think, was linked to the income, and where it was coming from. My mom being sort of the breadwinner. So it's interesting. But for me, I've been more conscious with my wife, my spouse, and she was raised in a similar household. So there's some common themes there. We were pretty in alignment once we agreed that we wanted to have kids and raise kids, that we would do things differently. But even then, despite our intentions to do things differently, I find sometimes when we're not deliberate about it, we sort of fall into some negative patterns. So I'm open to also understanding how to break that and stick to it, so to speak, when I'm thinking about making this lifestyle change of parenting with a purpose, with vulnerability, with holding up the mirror to myself and constantly learning and reflecting. That takes practice. It's easier for me to do that with other people externally.
Mm-hmm.
I used to work directly with students in college, and I could talk about all that and still train. But it's different when it's me and my kids and my wife. That's the part where I get stuck.
Well, Joe, you're talking about this, and it really touches me because it's my experience as well. I look at my dad now and I'm like, man, dad, like I wish abuelo was better with you, right? Like I was like, is you didn't have that tool. You like you grew up looking at a model that was that came from the struggle, right? Like, my abuelo like didn't have shoes to go to school. He had to walk like an hour with all his brothers and sisters and to go to school. He lived in El Campo and he used need to walk an hour just to get to elementary school. My abuelo didn't even finish high school. It was rough. So all he had was the model of like how rough things were and poverty, la necesidad. So I don't blame my dad. I think my dad is actually a great grandpa, very very good grandfather. I'm very proud of him. I feel like he's he is what he couldn't give me because I grew up. He's giving to my daughter and my little sobrinito. So I have a sobrinito now. He has two grandkids. So that's enough for me to see that he's doing that and he's kind of like leaving that stuff behind. He's also learning as we go. Jorge, I had around the same topic. I wanted to talk to you about the expectations that are put in our first generation. This first generation that it's looking to do things differently. How those expectations and how do they translate into fatherhood?
And I'm assuming that you're saying that because we're first generation, like first generation college graduates, first generation like immigrants, or what did you mean?
Yeah, and I'm talking about the first generation. I mean, all of us here are first. For example, I'm the first generation out of Puerto Rico, right, in my family, but we have first generation college graduates just like yourself, and we have also. I feel like we might be the first generation also looking to be more active, more mindful in when it comes to parenting. How do you? I mean, do you think the expectations like were these expectations that came with what we're doing, or was it something like, do you think it's something generational? Do you think like next generation will carry on what we're doing? Is it
I
something
think a
that
little bit
will
of everything,
skip
man.
a generation? Talk to me a
Yeah.
little bit about that. What is your theory about it?
I think based on how you said it, I think those all those theories are coming into play at the same time, depending on who you speak to. I think that I feel like for me, the one that's playing in my life, the the one that is active in my life is acknowledging that I am the transitional character in my family. I am the first person this. I am the first person to graduate high school. I am the first person to graduate from college. And um, there's a lot of first person this, first that, first gen this, right? There's a lot of moments where I'm like, oh, that's such. I am the first this. So there is I feel like there's an intergenerational expectation and intergenerational pressure to keep that baton going. And I'm holding the baton currently, right? And then kind of acknowledging my ancestors, acknowledging my grandfather's efforts, acknowledging my tios and the people before me that immigrated to this country. Forget about the concept of immigration, just in general survival, right? Like how in the past 500 years, uh, what ancestors made the choice to survive so we can exist here, and exist, uh, trying to make this societal paradigm shift in the way that fathers are perceived, and the way based on the way we treat ourselves and we treat our kids, and that generational work that I'm doing by myself, that was passed on to me by my dad and that was passed on to me by his dad. I am in a space. I feel like mentally I'm in a space where I am undoing a lot of traumas from my past. I am undoing my own personal, and I'm witnessing the stuff that I have to still undo for my kids because I taught them also bad traumas, right? So it wasn't until, like, I don't know about you guys, but my experience with immigration being undocumented and my experience with domestic violence, all that kind of like, I had to grow up faster. I had to like my perception of reality was, I mean, I was recently diagnosed with ADHD, you know, and anxious distress and depression. And I was like, what? you know. But it makes sense based on my life experiences, right? And now I'm at a stage in life where I'm putting my life experiences into theory and into practicum. And I'm able to look back and reflect on it and go, okay, I made it. I'm the first this, I'm the first that. I made it. Oh, okay. I still got that. Okay, cool. Check. I got a house. Okay. I got a home, you know. I got certain things that the first generation, first American dream guy already did. I already did that. I think we all kind of hopefully did some of that, right?
Mhm.
Now the next part is consistency. How do I stay consistent as a father and pass on this baton, uh, and really honor those ancestors, right? And really work on really being a good person fundamentally, but also facing my own traumas. And then watching my kids going, oh crap, like when I see my daughters get depressed or when I see them anxious, dude. I don't know if you guys see this, but I see myself in them. I'm like, dang it. I remember when I was their age, I was depressed the same way. Or I remember when I was 18, I was confused about certain things about voting and taxes. I couldn't believe that I was taking so much money out of my. You should have seen my daughter's face when she turned 18, right? So those moments, those touch points as a father, that I'm like, I'm glad I was there. I'm glad I was there to hold the hand of my daughters or hold the hand of my kids. And now I see that role, right? Like I see 3 kids passing in my life, right? And each of them in different stages. And I'm like, dang, I'm so glad, one, that I was capable of being those moments, consistent, and that's how I'm facing the trauma of my ancestors, is going, oh crap, I was just present, and that's all I needed to do. So, kind of unpacking that parenting space that I've been into, right? A lot of unpacking, a lot of undoing, but then going back and revisiting and realize, dude, our work is not done. It's not done at all. It won't be done until these kids are getting older, until we die, you know. So I don't know if that makes sense. I went on a huge tangent in circles,
No,
but
I love it. I love it because you know, Jorge, we have this vortex of opinions and history, and you kind of like grab it and link it all together, past with the present and the future, and you have great examples. I love that. You know, when we talk about expectations, I feel like the pressure's on, at least for me. Pressure's on because, like Jorge said, we accomplished things that nobody believed we were going to accomplish. We were against all odds, and then here we are, and it's like, how do I keep this going? Now the pressure, like the thoughts that están en mi cabeza, is about, will my daughter be able to have this and more, and we should be able to carry it forward to her generation and those around her. And I feel kind of a certain pressure. I'm not gonna lie to you, and sometimes it makes me forget about where I'm at. So I take this, a weekend, do something for myself, kind of like me centro de nuevo. I just ground myself, and I continue because I feel like I like to plan things, but I also like to leave a little space for improv. That's part of being a dad. So, Chris, I wanted to talk to you about these expectations, and one thing that we were talking about in our first meeting was language, right? We talk about language and the certain, and talking about pressure as well. When you carry a Latino last name, the first thing that people ask you is, you speak Spanish, tú hablas español, ¿dónde tú eres? Oh, where are you really from? You're like, I tell people, and I like to do this practice. If for those in the audience who are watching us, I don't know if you've done it, but when people ask me, where are you from? I say, well, I'm from Crozet, Virginia. I live right here. And they're like, oh, but where? I'm like, yeah, I live in, Pleasant Green. And then they're like, oh, but where are you from? And I'm like, oh, yeah, my fam. I start going in circles because I want people to get out of their comfort zone and really ask me what they're meaning. Oh, you mean like where my family is from? I'm from Puerto Rico, where I was born and raised. Why do I speak Spanish? There's a lot of pressure in that, especially like if you're around non-Hispanic members at work, or we're all been in those spaces where we're only the only Latino guy, and we like get voluntold to represent and when nobody's asking. But the language is that big thing where, again, Sergio or Joe or Jorge or Chris, and it's like you see our last names. Where are you from? ¿De dónde eres? You know, you must speak Spanish. Chris, talk to us about your own journey with yourself and your family. How has been the certain like expectations of managing the language, being bilingual, carrying that with the next generation?
Yeah, no, see, I mean, the language is definitely like even within our own immediate circle, right? It's like, I'll go right into it of my daughter. I just spoke about my oldest daughter. She really struggled with speaking in general, with communicating. Uh, we at some point assessed and had to go to therapy, but during this time, the immediate family that would see us occasionally is like, "Ya habla español," o "¿Por qué no habla español?" And it's like, I don't want to go and explain the reason why she's not speaking Spanish, but in reality, es porque she needs to communicate. So right now, se va a comunicar como ella quiere. Like I need to be able to communicate with my daughter. Pero from a Latin community, like, it's like, tiene que hablar español. En la escuela va a aprender inglés, right? Like, when I came to the US at the age of 8, and like I would remember conversations that my parents would be having. I'll be on the side or with cousins or whatever. It's like, nomás prende la tele en inglés y que vea pura tele en inglés. That's how he's gonna learn. Um, or just wait till the summer's over. Put him, don't put him in bilingual classes. Put him in English classes y así va a aprender. Like these kind of like expectations that come with, like you said, just growing up in this Latin community, but also like then you flip the coin, right? And then you do go out to other events where you are the Latino person, and they want to start relating with you because you ordered, arroz y frijoles for dinner while you're out there, and it's like, oh, like then they try to make that conversation and get in there, and try to like throw in the Spanish words, and you got to kind of play along as well. um pero when it really comes down to, for me, it's really important for as a parent to acknowledge what your kid needs before, and not getting carried away with the expectations of, like I said, close family, immediate family, um, people that um, because that's there. Like they're always going to have an opinion, right? And ultimately, you have to remind yourself you are the dad, you are the parent, and not just the dad. You have a spouse. Like she also has an opinion, and we know what we're going through to communicate with our kids. Um, so like, yeah, eventually you don't want to lose that essence, for sure. At least I don't. I want my kids to be bilingual like I am, and be able to talk to their grandparents in Spanish because that's their preferred language, right? I want them to go to a friend's house and play with kids and speak English. Like that's perfectly fine, and I would love for them to do that. But if there's at a point where I need to make a choice because my kid has a preference, they're still a kid too. So let them grow into it. Like don't set those boundaries. I think, Jorge, when you're talking about the expectations and all those things that come with being first generation this, first generation that, um, you also have to. I guess one of the things that seems like we're in agreement is that that responsibility that you carried, um, even though it made you or it made us who we are today, doesn't mean that our kids have to carry that as well. It's perfectly fine if they don't,
Yes.
right? Like our parents, our family talks about the American dream. That doesn't mean that they need to carry the luggage that we carried,
Mm.
right? I think it's important for us to provide that better future, and I think as a community, as a community of fathers, we are now more informed. There's more resources, there's more groups, right? Maybe not enough, but enough for us to be able to make better decisions and not, put that unnecessary stress. Because hey, like I don't know if I have ADHD or if I'm depressed because I've never been diagnosed, but because that's also part of my community. We don't go to the goddamn doctor, guys.
Hmm.
Like that's very true. Like my parents, my grandparents were like if unless you were sick and in bed and for whatever reason you couldn't do what you needed to do, then you might go to the doctor, right?
Yeah.
But
You bring
health
up a
is
good point,
extremely
Chris, about
important.
like
Yeah.
how health, like how that thing we pass on to the next generation of bad habits,
Mm-hmm.
of like, why aren't we going to the doctor? Why are we so scared to know the truth? If it's something wrong with us, something's going on inside of us, why do we have to wait until last minute?
And
Why
now
do we
we
have to
add this
wait?
layer of now that it's more openly talked about, which is mental health,
Yeah.
right? Not
Yeah.
just health of like heartbeats and high blood pressure, but there's mental health. And to be a good father, you have to have good mental health as well.
And guide us to the next topic. We're talking about asking for help. Asking for help. We all been there. We all felt that need. Asking for help. In my personal experience, asking for help. I always had a a role model. That's mi abuelo Pedro. Um, he's my daughter was with him today in Puerto Rico. He's my everything. Like, he's my abuelo. Is so special because he kind of broke down that stereotype of, like, the tough abuelo, a tough man. He was also a grandfather very early. Like, my mom was a teenage mom, so I guess, he took me in as a grandkid, but also I spent a lot of time with him so my mom could work. And I remember asking for help for my abuelo, like for things that were like physical illnesses that I didn't know, and like things that you go through also when you're becoming like a teenager and your body's changing and things like that, and also different and difficult situations. And I think to this day, when I need to ask for help, the first person that I still call is my abuelo. And he's able to tell me his honest opinion. He's getting to the age where everything is a little bit more like peace and love. However, he still tells me the truth, and I can see it, that just, la madurez, like maturity that he has now. It's He wants everybody to get along. He wants everybody to be well. And I was talking to him today earlier, and I was just acknowledging, like, how he sent me this picture with my daughter, and we have kind of like the same picture in the same place. So that really touched my heart. But talking about help, I also speak with him, and ask him about the old times. How was it in el pasado? And he always tell me, like, people were too busy working, trying to keep up with life, and the kids. Nobody wanted to ask for help. You could be drowning, whether it was in debt, whether it was in different like situations, and you never ask for help. You go to church and pray and say, me, or help me with this, but you kept it inside. It was kind of like translated to like a more like spiritual thing, like, necesito ayuda, I got, voy a la iglesia, and I pray, but I don't tell anybody unless I'm in the confessionary, right? So we're taught to kind of like keep this inside ourselves. And this next topic, I want whoever wants to go first. It's more like an open conversation, and we want to just go back and forth in between with each other, asking for help. Why is it important asking for help? What has been your like personal your personal choices about asking for help? Are you some like a person that your friends ask you for help? How about for yourself? Like, that happens a lot too. We have all these, sometimes we have a friend that is the friend that you rely on, and then this friend does not know how to ask for help, but everybody's asking for his or her advice around certain topics, and then you just accumulate all this, and don't know how to channel it. So whoever wants to unmute the mic first. If not, I'm going to call out names. Asking for help.
I can jump in here because this is something that I think about quite often, especially because on most days I do feel like I'm drowning with raising the kids and working and being a spouse and not, try not to neglect my own health too. Cause, and it's funny, ironic, the timing of this panel. Yesterday, I was listening to an NPR story that was all about men's health and acknowledging the fact that we were socialized to not worry about ourselves, and also this myth of capitalism and all these other systems at play. They are detrimental to our health by nature. And so for me personally, it's funny. It's easier for me to offer help and counsel. I am someone in the professional setting, in the friend setting, in the familia setting. I am the person who can actively listen and help sort of be there for somebody. But on the flip, it's really hard for me to, and I don't know what that is. I think some of it has to do with shame, like feeling like it's shame on me for not knowing how to do something. I think is that part. I went to therapy for the first time a few years ago, and what came from that, there was a lot of unpacking, my own child upbringing and all that, and how it showed up in the marriage and parenting. But something that the therapist had mentioned to me was that I have a big issue with competence. Like I really pride myself on being somebody who's competent at all things, and parenting is one of them. And so for me to ask for help means that I internalize that to mean that I'm not competent, right? Like I'm not good enough to know something. So here I am, having to ask for help, and in most cases, I'm just gonna sort of try doing it on my own.
How do you identify, Joe, when it's time? Because I feel like I know how to identify like around work life. When I know like work is getting too overwhelming, I know how to identify that and when to say I need a couple of days. I'm going to ask for leave. I'm going to get away. But when it comes to asking for help, like for myself and situations that I'm going through, it seems like, there's always the gauge. And it's like when it's all the way to the max, that's when I realize when I can't handle things anymore, that I need to reorganize and I need to ask for help. Do you have like maybe, do you know how to identify these situations?
Well, as it relates to my kids, when I start to notice that I'm more angry and lash out when they're sort of pushing my buttons, because they know how to do that very well, it's at that point that I snap and say, okay, so because I'm, here with my wife, I'll tag out and say, I need you to like go do something, because now I'm going to turn into my own mom who was raging, when we were acting up, and that's not what I want to do with my kids. So when I notice that it's affecting my children, that's when I'm like thinking, oh shit, I better schedule that therapy appointment because I need help right now, or maybe I should call my brother and say, just talk it out, or, something. But it's usually whenever it's impacting in a negative way, my kids, that's the wake up call for me.
Awesome. Jorge, I wanted to ask you something really quick. We're approaching the hour. So we have around like 8 more minutes. But talking about boundaries, I'm big on boundaries. I've always done it since I met my wife. Being big on boundaries had gotten me into trouble because nobody handles them the same way, right? It's like, your personal boundaries, the boundaries that you want for your children, the boundaries that you want maybe as a spouse or as a father. Do you have any recommendations or any tips, or how do you reinforce those? And I know you have kids that are adults, right now, and you have kids that are a little bit younger. Have you seen the generational gap when talking about boundaries?
Man, I think just the whole discussion on boundaries for a father, just the simple concept of that could be its own Zoom call. It can be its own meeting. It could be its own curriculum. Because for us to, I feel like I'm going to speak in my eye sense. For me to finally acknowledge those boundaries that I didn't have, or I did have, right? I have to also acknowledge my pride and my ego, and how I navigate with my pride and ego. So as I began to develop stronger boundaries, let's give it a time frame of 2 years ago, right? Those boundaries that I began to acknowledge I didn't set before, Number one, being a people pleaser, right? Being a father sometimes requires you to be in 10 different places at the same time. And you got to please, sometimes it feels like you got to please everybody, right? So, boundaries, right? How important it is for us to practice them, to learn, and there's a proper way to model it too, right? To model boundaries to our kids. If they see you happy doing your work in, let's say, like, for example, here I am right now in my garage. This is the space where I come in, write music, I come in, decompress, I come in, check in with my community. So I have to set the boundary to my kids and show them, hey, look, this is a meaningful time for me. I need to be in this space. I'm teaching them to do the same thing for their friends. I'm hoping to teach them based on the way my lack of and my strength of boundaries. So when they get into situations where they gotta go and practice boundaries with their friends, they know how to say no. Dude. They know how to say no to drinking, or they know how to say no to particular substances. And so just the entire concept of how to reinforce boundaries, I've learned the hard way. I've learned that I have to practice them, do it as well. I can't just say it and say it and say it. I can't just please and please and please. I have to learn how to say no so they can learn how
Mhm.
to say no. I have to learn how to say yes properly and not give myself too much to others so I can have time to have boundaries for my family. Same thing with being in a relationship, same thing with being at work. Like, there's another the mental component of having the mental
Yeah.
boundaries, right? Especially with those of us fathers that just love keeping the door open after work. They come home and they take it out on their kids what they went through at work, right? They don't know how to shut down the emotional button. They don't know how to go like this, boop, and go, all right, I'm home, because there's that trauma, dude. So when we talk about boundaries, I think about trauma. I think about mental health, right, Chris? I think about like how we manage ourselves and how we walk around with this meat of bones that we all carry. How do we actually do it, right? Um, because these kids are watching, dude. It's freaking creepy how much they watch us. It's creepy how much they absorb us, and they learn from us, and they have every right to learn, and it's exciting for them. It's really exciting for them to learn. So it's like a hard thing to remember. Like, it's like we have to remember that when we're reinforcing rules, we can have fun. We can have fun with it too, you know. But it's tricky.
I
It
love
really
that. I
is.
love the having fun part. And I
Yeah.
love, it takes, boundaries is something that you have to practice with yourself at all times in order for others to kind of like know the limits. Um, I wanted to do a quick, kind of like a quick round, because we are heading out in our conversation. I've loved this Latinidad panel and how deep we're getting into conversations. And I'm going to be honest with you guys. I don't think we should wait until next year to have another one. I think we should, kind of like look in the next, 4 or 5 months to hold another one, because it's important not only for the audience but for us. I feel like I come out of these panels lighter, and I kind of feel like I'm not alone. Like Joe started in the beginning of the conversation, he just started saying that. Um, I wanted to ask you, and I want like a minute each, starting with Chris. Any advice for a new dad? Within the topics that we talked about, what's the best advice that you wish you had when you became a father?
Oh, that is definitely putting me on the hot seat. The advice I think is that we don't all have the answers, and that's okay. Like, just admitting to yourself and as to that, like, I'm not gonna have the right answers at all times, but I have the tools to know what to do, right? And if you don't have those tools, there's a lot of resources, there's a lot of communities that you could join. Um, but know that, like, for somebody listening to this, knowing that they're not alone, right? There's a group of dads out there that this forum, this medium exists because we want to keep learning from each other. We want to hear other people's stories. We want to be able to identify, right? Not everybody goes through the same experiences, but there's somebody that has something similar out there and they've overcome. or they just gone through it and it's been rough. But knowing that you're not alone, I think it's definitely helpful. Um, and ultimately, at the end of the day, we want the best for our kids, right? And that's one of, when Jorge was talking about what unites us fathers. I think ultimately that's it, right? We just want to do a good job. We want to be a good role model. We want to let go of that luggage that we've carried for so long. We want our kids to go forward with life and not carry that load, and start fresh and have opportunities. Um, and as long as we know that that's the goal, I think how we get there looks different for everyone, but we can all learn from each other.
Wow. Amazing. Amazing. I wish I had those words when I started. But now I have you guys here, and I'm very blessed to have each and every one of you, to know that if I need something, or I need some words, or un oído, you're there for me. And no matter how long, like, we haven't talked to each other, we got our own things going, we're always there when we call upon each other. So my advice would be to build your circle, because that's your foundation. That's the stronger the foundation, the stronger your journey. Like, it's going to be able to withstand anything. Build your circle. And I feel like with fatherhood, it gets smaller and smaller as you grow as a dad, but it's stronger. So that's my advice. Joe.
I think give yourself grace. That's the first thing that came to mind. I think being okay to make mistakes and give yourself grace to continue to learn and grow. And it goes back to what both of you have said about seeking community and not doing this in isolation of everybody else.
Jorge.
Man, the recent big lesson that I've learned in my life, being a father, there is such a thing as I learned that there is such a thing as doing too much and not doing enough. Doing too much, enabling, right? Not doing enough, right? There's this little space. It's like corner of this box, and instead of going up and instead of going this way, we should go that way, right? Like together. I feel like we need to remember, if for all the new parents, to be, like you said, we have to be graceful. We have to be graceful with each other, but also acknowledge when we are down, when we are feeling like we need help, when we don't practice our boundaries healthy, man. That's one of the things that I feel like is the most important one, is like boundaries, you know? So, yeah.
Well, guys, this has been amazing. I feel like, whew, my trip is going to be one full of, like, self-evaluation. I'm going to be looking forward to what's next. And I'm going to give myself, also some room to kind of, like, improvise and go with the flow, because that's also something that I need to do. I realize that it's something that we constantly need to work on. We all have our different things, and that's something that I do need to work on. I wanted to give you thanks for being here, for being present. This panel, I'm not gonna lie to the audience. We all are very busy dads, but we're mindful that we each have our lives going on. So we started kind of like discussing the idea of getting together a couple of months, and we finally made it happen. And that's okay, because we're here. Nobody is like pressured to be here. We're here on our own time. And I want to give thanks to Fathering Together. Fathering Together's mission is to build supportive communities for fathers, enriched by resources and storytelling. So if you guys that are watching this want to donate, you can go to fatheringtogether.org, make a small donation. Or if you want to volunteer, there's tons of opportunity there to volunteer. We're all going to have our social media handles and our information on this episode for Jorge, for Joe, for Chris, for Sergio, myself. Please feel free to contact us and engage with us, whether we're doing community work or just online. Feel free to reach out. And last thought is, I feel like Fatherhood is being present. If you're not present, you cannot talk about all these things. You cannot experience all of these things. So let's start by being present in our children's lives and being intentional about it. Thank you, everyone. Buenas noches. Hasta la próxima.